Good morning, everybody. Here's a quick preview over what we're going to cover in this forecast video. The big topic that I think we need to discuss is just how much moisture we're able to get out of the Gulf. As the Bermuda High continues to expand and dominate the Atlantic, I think it's going to be a critical piece to this story of not only the near-term moisture, but what we could be seeing with the tropical season as well. So we're going to address that in a few minutes. We've seen a pretty sizable trend, or pretty, noticeable trend in the forecast models that kind of back up some of our earlier concerns about the end of July, not only increasing in the risk of tropical activity, but also in the risk of a lot of heat returning to the central U.S. And it has been the opposite position as to where the longer-term models have had it. And I'm going to explain to you why I think that's the case. I want to have a talk about where things are going with respect to severe weather. I also want to look into the very long range with respect to La Niña. I really feel as though the base state of the atmosphere is very much La Niña, and it's going to continue to go that direction. While the correlations are terrible right now with La Niña, they may become more important late fall into winter. So that's what we're going to talk about. The animation you've been watching here is just where I typically start things, right? It's the satellite data from yesterday all the way through this morning as the sun was rising. And it's interesting to take note of a couple things while the sun was setting here. A lot of smoke from the wildfires in Canada, as you can see wrapping here in the backside of this area that was quite wet over the weekend. If you're east, it was a lot of isolated storms. Many of them produced some severe weather. To the south, it was the same situation. And then down here into parts of the Four Corners states, just because of the way the flow of the atmosphere is rolling through here like this, we were actually able to build our storms on our east-facing slopes, but the tops of these storms were getting blown back to the south and west. And speaking of the south and west, there's still quite a bit of wildfire smoke that is in the atmosphere over parts of the southwest. Now, the biggest fires we've got going right now, they are up here in parts of Canada. I just want to show you. Let's go back to Friday the 11th. You can see throughout the day more wildfire smoke from parts of northern Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and getting over to Ontario. But there was a much deeper low. Look, you can see the heat signatures from the fires here. But there was a much deeper low that took shape as we got into the weekend. And while it blew that smoke around quite a bit, watch this right over here in parts of Ontario. That low curled its way up into the Hudson Bay, and that's impressive to see for midsummer, a low of that magnitude. Usually, by the time we get into midsummer, it's quite difficult to produce such deep synoptic scale lows if you're not inside the tropics, but we saw one here anyway. Okay, that all points to where we could be going with this smoke, and here's just a 48-hour forecast of vertically integrated smoke content. So we kind of have our two source regions, the western U.S. and then the Canadian wildfires, continuing to spread that smoke throughout those two big regions. Some of it getting into the Great Lakes, a lot of it getting into the Four Corners states and desert Southwest. So just some perspective on where we could see some impacts with air quality, but also that kind of deep, hazy sunshine type setup with a lot of that smoke in the upper atmosphere. If we just look back at the weekend, we started off the weekend with a lot of severe weather. One of the bigger events came out of parts of Iowa and then went into northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin. There was a pair of squall lines that rolled through this area, one of which produced quite a bit of damaging winds. I saw gusts over 80 miles an hour. The left Iowa went into northwestern Illinois and into this pocket of Wisconsin. Now, that wasn't the only storm to be watched. That was just the one that was closest to me, so I was keeping an eye on it. I want to point something out, though, when you look at this. Find these holes, like this one here, or that one in through there. And there are many of them throughout the southeast. There's pockets in the northeast, and we've seen dryness at times start to show up in places. But where it has rained, the rainfall has been very intense, and we have had just complete and open access to tropical moisture. And I want to talk to you about where that's going, how long we think that's going to last. But that's just a look back at your weekend precipitation totals. Stretching it back 2 weeks, we're just trying to find, if there's any sort of broad-scale issues with the moisture delivery. Starting in the west, we continue to see a very dry spring and summer here into parts of the Columbia Basin. Pockets in Montana, although better rain is coming into this area, still have been dry for these last 2 weeks. Most of California had an early shutoff of the rainfall in spring and has been very, very dry since. There have been storms popping up on the mountains, but that's very common for this time of year. Of course, in the last 2 weeks, there are places down here in south central Texas, which we talked a lot about last week, that picked up not just 10 times the normal rainfall, but some places up to 20 times normal rainfall. And it's just incredible to see these amounts. And it did storm here again over the weekend, and there was local flash flooding. But as I think it through, we look at what was left over from Chantal. And by the way, today, if you're in this area, please be aware of the flash flood risk from the storms coming through later on today. But if you take a look at the reds, right, we've got some issues in the northern plains. There's that pocket in Illinois Indiana, parts of Ohio, and Michigan. I'm just so familiar with it because I know what my backyard looks like right now. The crops in this area are probably withstanding this at some degree, but without better precipitation, we're going to be seeing some issues. After a record wet spring, pockets of, Kentucky, for example, have gone over much hotter and drier. There's a hole in Kansas we can't ignore as well. And throughout the Delta and into the southeast, there have been places where these storms have missed as of late. So we're going to take a close look at where that soil moisture map gives us kind of an indication on where we could be in deficits versus where these surpluses are. So no surprise in the Northwest, but take a look at these pockets in through this area that need to be seeing quite a bit more moisture, or along parts of the Gulf Coast into parts of southern Georgia and Florida. And I think it's just a very informative map on who has missed on some of these what have actually been just incredible summer thunderstorm events with tremendous amounts of rainfall and flash flooding. Most of that's been complements of this. I mean, this is just a look today, right now, as you're watching this, as to what the atmospheric winds and the low levels have done. Our Pacific high continues to be expansive and parked right here, and it's driving, again, more strong winds along the west coast. We can see our Bermuda high is kind of broken up into two pieces. There's kind of an inner core here, and then there's a broader area of high pressure that extends all the way over into parts of, the Gulf here. That's quite expansive too. And this is what's kept so much of that moisture just rolling out of the Gulf across much of the United States. We have seen deeper lows curl up in the Hudson Bay. This just saw another one here. And we need to talk about how this is going to translate east across the Atlantic and get over into parts of Europe, which we know and have been discussing extensively about how dry it's been. So if we just go have a look at the next 15 days, I love this map. I think it just packs a lot of information into a single map. There's something interesting happening in the Pacific. We watched the trends over the weekend. We're getting a bit blocked up. There seems to be high pressure over low pressure. And maybe we could be looking at some sort of an omega block here in the Pacific. What I'm concerned about with this is the prevalence, especially building over the next 2 weeks, of higher pressure and ridging and heat coming in from the east. Now, what have I shown you from all of the long-range models for weeks, it feels like the European weeklies, for example? They've attempted to build in heat from the west, and that has not been the case. We've not seen that happen, which means me, we all have to take what this upcoming long-range forecast from the European model, which we tend to rely on, we have to take it with a big grain of salt because it's missed this. And that ridge that's coming back in is going to be bringing a lot of heat, but the trough axis, which still sits here, means I'm quite concerned about the risk of severe weather. And we are in squall line, derecho, bow echo season. I mean, it's mid-July. Our typical storm structure tends to come out of linear mode of thunderstorms. We've also seen a breakdown of the pattern across Europe, and Europe was enduring incredibly dry conditions for a long time. If you look back over the last 45 days, significant parts of France, getting into Germany, you've probably seen some articles about how low the river systems are in those two countries. The Balkans have been very, very dry. Parts of Turkey have been dry. Whereas you get over into Ukraine, it's been a west versus east issue in Ukraine, while the Russian wheat belt has been seeing quite a bit of precipitation. And it's interesting, if you go look at the NDVI data for this area, I've highlighted France just to get us started. And the NDVI values in France through the beginning of July are outside of the historical envelope here, which is from 2001 to 2023. 2024 is this line, but the current values are here, meaning the crops in France are struggling. If we just come over to Spain very quickly here, they are still above average. Come over to Germany, they're actually sitting, once this kind of loads here, we're sitting below average. They were quite low at the beginning of July. And as we move farther to the east, let's go over to Ukraine just to get a good look here. Now, Ukraine kind of straddled the issues. And so what's interesting is they are technically below their historical NDVI values, as you can see here. But I think the crop is doing better in Ukraine than we may think. Choosing all of Russia, that's what I just did, and looking at its crop growing areas only, its NDVI is above normal. All right, so that's just a couple things to think about. Now, over the next week, the next 5 days, most of France is looking drier, whereas getting into Germany, Poland, over toward Ukraine, the Balkans, they're expecting to pick up more thunderstorm activity. But take a look at what happens as you get out there 7 days, or if I include all 10 days. The breakdown of that blocked pattern in Europe is now signaling much, much wetter conditions for places. Now, it's going to be the same thing like I've been talking about in the States. We are going to break drought in areas, but in some places where we miss these storms, we are expecting conditions to get drier. All right, speaking of the States, let's go back and do this. Let's zoom out, come right back over here. In fact, I got to turn off Russia first. And let's take this down to a admin level 1, which will now let us see individual states. And we're just kind of having a look here at where we grow crops in the U.S. and Canada. Let's start in the Cotton Belt. Let's just pick off several states. Hope this isn't going to be that slow. Coming through the Cotton Belt, including the Carolinas into Georgia. We'll get over here into Mississippi. We'll also pick up, if I can get Mississippi there, we're going to grab Louisiana, which has some patchy drought right now, and also Texas. And as we do that, now this isn't meaning to leave anybody out that grows cotton, but as we do this, what we start to see is that with only 2 to 3% of the whole Cotton Belt, and I know we grow cotton out west too, but with only 2 to 3% of the Cotton Belt in drought right now, the NDVI values are very, very high. Now, what's interesting about this is to compare and contrast the Cotton Belt with the Corn Belt. So I got to unselect these locations here. And sorry, the site's a little clunky this morning. That's all right. But I want to show you how things have been going, for example, in Iowa and Nebraska. All right, so let's take off the Carolinas here. Sorry, this is a bit slow. There we go. And now let's come up north. These are 2 areas where I have seen a lot of precipitation as of late. And if you look, their NDVI values right now in these 2, these are powerhouse states for growing, corn, soybeans. It is the highest we've seen since 2000. And they've been getting the rain. Now, if we keep adding more states in the Corn Belt, like my home state of Illinois, which has pockets of drought, that value comes down a bit, but it's still high. Indiana, northern versus southern, has been 2 entirely different stories. But overall, as we keep adding in these states, and I'll make sure I link this site so you can go do this on your own. We would say that a lot of the midsection of the United States, and even as we go a bit farther to the north and grab the Dakotas, and then also grab Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, that overall our Midwestern, we'll just kind of call this entire area the Midwest, the NDVI values are higher than a year ago. And not only that, but they're kind of pushing the envelope here. Look at that. So there they all are. Okay. I just wanted to point this out because this is going to be critical in trying to understand any future stress on this crop, given that from space right now it looks so good. All right, what's been the culprit? Let's just come back to this narrative. There's the Pacific High. And over the last 40 plus days, the flow has been like this. It's driven strong offshore wind, upwelling of cold water. It's what's made the Northwest so very, very dry. And then you see the expansive Bermuda High, which has been here and coming through the Caribbean into the Gulf. We have just opened up the Gulf repeatedly. And it looks something like this when you compare precipitable water, that's just the juice in the atmosphere, to the long-standing average. And we've just been wet. That's been a lot of moisture. Now, there are still pockets of drought. I'm not denying it, but the atmosphere has not been blocked from the tremendous amount of tropical moisture that can get into this area this time of year. So the net effect of this is since the beginning of meteorological summer, June 1st, our precipitation pattern has been highly polarized across the country. Very, very hot and dry, really more dry than hot in the Northwest, although it's hot there now. We've seen some dryness in the Canadian prairie. That's get down in a part of North Dakota. And then you just take a look, and it's very difficult to find expansive areas of drought if you're in this area. So there's a couple of things that are going to be taking place as we transition through the middle of the summer and start to work our way toward fall. One of those things I'll be watching is how the atmosphere is kind of breathing and where the MJO lives. We have seen a lot of suppression in the atmosphere here and a lot of rising motion in this area. And this is what's prevented a whole lot of early tropical cyclone development. Yes, we've had Barry and Chantel. I'm not saying that, but in order to get a season going, you need to take the lid off the atmosphere here. And right now we do see that the National Hurricane Center has got an area out that's got a 30% chance of development over the next 7 days. There is a weak tropical low that's going to form here, and it is going to move in this direction as it does so, taking its moisture. But I think it's going to be more of just access to tropical thunderstorm activity in this area, not the development of any sort of sizable tropical system as we go forward. So speaking as we go forward, let's get back to one of the things I told you at the beginning we'd talk about. As I play this out, what I notice is that the reds, which represent sinking motion, and the greens, which represent rising motion, by the time we get past mid-month, the 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th, there is it's probably convectively coupled, but there is a wave moving in the tropical rising and sinking motion that's coming across the Pacific. And it seems to be taking the lid off of in the 3rd and 4th week of July. And it takes the lid off the upper atmosphere suppression. Excuse me. And if it does that, we could be looking at an end of July, beginning of August, just more favorable conditions for tropical systems to form in this part of the world. So the Caribbean, the Gulf, and the Atlantic. So just keep an eye on that as we press forward toward the end of this month. Until then, we tend to see this, okay? So here is the really wet weather that's associated with that potential tropical disturbance here. We have flood risk today in this region, so be very aware of this. But there is no denying that we've got lows that are curling up here. We've got open access to Gulf moisture, and it's just being deposited in the Midwest. There's better rains for parts of Montana. And even though you see a hole in this part of like Texas, Oklahoma, maybe Arkansas, there will still be thunderstorms erupting inside of that as we go forward. The newest model runs are also trying to bring in better surges of monsoonal moisture into Arizona, which is something we've been keeping a close eye on as well. So this is where I want to take you, all right? Over the next 3 days, okay, take a look at where we're expecting our severe weather. See that? Today, tomorrow, getting into Wednesday. As I mentioned, we do need to be paying close attention here. Virginia, Maryland, parts of probably Delaware, getting into New Jersey, Pennsylvania, eastern Pennsylvania, the risk of flooding, big storms in Florida. We also are keeping a close eye on the same region that's been hit repeatedly down here in Texas. But my main story has been this for a while, and I'll just watch it again. There's your Bermuda high. As we look at the European model 15-day forecast from today's 0Z run, where is it by Thursday? There. Where is it by the weekend? It's still here. As we go into next week and beyond, it's just, we're not losing it. In fact, the only big concern I have is that by the end of the month, could it be sitting in this area? I think that's a possibility. But can you do this? Just keep your eye right over here for a moment, okay? I'll take you back. Now watch right here. You see the wind barbs? You see the flow? What do we have? We have systems doing this and just open access to moisture here. And lots of it. Now where it's being deposited is the key. But I'm most concerned about this. I went out 10 days in the forecast. Let's go all the way out there to late in the day on the 23rd, all right? And I said, I'll pick a spot in Iowa. Over the next 10 days, where is the flow coming from? So I traced it backward from a forecast, knowing where it is today and where it's going to be 10 days from now. Does that make sense? So these lines tell me, and it's just rolling. See them? And what's got me very concerned about that is this. This is precipitable water as forecast by the European model. The higher the values, the juicier the air. So, for example, there is the deep surge of tropical moisture coming in with this potential area of interest for tropical development here. But I don't shut it down. I mean, look at this moisture coming through. That's all the way out there, 23rd, 24th. And what I'm really concerned about is how this moisture can be used in the discussion about the instability of the atmosphere. And we watched all weekend the forecast models crank up the instability. So remember, the higher the value you see in CAPE, okay, which is the potential energy in the atmosphere, the more the atmosphere is primed, should there be thunderstorms, to extract that energy and turn it into kinetic energy, right? The downward, the return of the instability to the surface. And just take a look at this. This is late this week, getting into next week. Here we go. This is this weekend, sorry. Now that's next week. And all I see here is just high CAPE values. And a lot of us are concerned about that. Now it's 10 days out, but it's been there in the forecast model all week. This idea that getting into midweek next week, we could see these CAPE values. Right now, I mean, the models are bonkers. 8,000 CAPE? You can produce massive tornadic events on 1,000 CAPE if the season's right. So I want you to be aware of this, because that particular setup with all that moisture continues to drive, well, a precipitation map that looks like this. As I play this forward, there's a frontal boundary draping through here by the middle and end of this week, bringing in rain from pockets of the Canadian Prairie, the southern part of it, through the northern plains into the upper Midwest. We then watch our tropical moisture spread here late this week. But the atmosphere is having no problems of just delivering rainfall through the next 10 days. Now, we're going to keep an eye on this area to see if it does, in fact, go drier. But my goodness, that's a lot of moisture coming into this system. So thinking that through, I'll tell you what, let's do this. I want to show you all 5 forecast models together. And remember, you can go to agweather.com and see these. But I'm looking for consistency in these 7-day forecast maps. And I see it, right? So there's a lot of consistency in the models. From there, this is what the culprit is. So there's your high over low or your omega block. I don't know. It kind of looks like both to me. But take a look at the downstream trough that's here. That's next Monday. Now, as that trough comes out, ridging is going to try to build in here. And that's what's going to ignite the risk of severe storms next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in this area. But as I mentioned at the beginning, you block up the Pacific, the downstream starts to get a little ridgy as well. And all the way out there toward the end of the month, there is a sizable ridge of high pressure in all of the models. This is just the European ensemble that's getting planted in the midsection of the country. Now, we need to ask what that's going to do to our precipitation pattern first, which is here. And you can see that all of our 4 major forecasting systems show something similar in week 2. There's a corridor in through there that is wetter. See that? But, we want to know if this is going to be extremely stormy, which I think it will be, and how long does it last if that ridge builds in? Because as the ridge builds in, I'm going to start to worry about this area that you just saw in the next 7 days could be drier. I'm talking about this spot right here. So again, what am I talking about? Here it is, the next 7 to 10 days, that area is drier. If that ridge then builds in on top of this, this is going to get really dry really quickly. So that's a very important note to kind of take to monitor carefully here. The other part of this is what are the temperatures going to do if that ridge forms? Because so far, if we look back at the June through mid-July or July 13th, we have had at times very, very humid conditions overnight, keeping the overnight lows quite hot. And if you take a look from Iowa through the Northeast, look at this region and through here. I got some places that have had an extremely hot overnight low temperature set up for this late spring and summer time frame. Since the beginning of the month of July, let's look at average temperature, so not high or low, but the combination. We've been cooler here, cloud cover and rain, but elsewhere it's been quite hot, especially as you get into the Northeast. Now, today the Northeast needs to look out for the risk of flooding. We have the smoke issues here. We have the dense fog early this morning in parts of Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. The heat currently, though, is in the west. And if you take a look at where those high temperatures are today, triple digit in the Central Valley, Columbia Basin's well into the 90s. This is today getting into tomorrow. Look at the cold air come blasting into the northern plains out of Canadian Prairie. Willamette Valley's hot, northeast is hot, quite hot right through this corridor. But what I'm concerned about is not really, the end of this week, getting into the weekend. It's next week we got to watch carefully. So take a look. Here's where we alluded to about 20 minutes ago. There's your next 5 days. So we play this out. That's day 5 through 10. Now, where did that heat come from? It's been sliding in from this direction, not that direction, which is what all the long-range models have said. Oh, watch the west. It's where the heat's going to build in. That's day 10. And day 10 through 15 is getting very hot. And we need to start to talk about what this means. This is hot overnight lows. This is hot daytime highs. And it's really showing the reflection of that big ridge building into this area as the Pacific gets blocked up. That is a top story going into the rest of this week's forecast. Now, the issue I've been complaining about with the models is seen right here. The Bermuda high has been strongest here. The Pacific high has been strongest there. Since the beginning of June, that's where they've been strongest. The models have been telling me that, no, it should be way stronger over toward the Aleutians and way stronger up here in the North Atlantic, and it hasn't been that way. So these models have been getting this wrong. Let me just go show it to you real quick. This is the pressure pattern. You see, where does it expecting the highest pressure to be? I don't know. Let's just look at the start of August. Oh, it's like, oh no, the Bermuda high is going to be strongest here, and the Pacific high is going to be strongest there. Yet it's not done that yet this year. These anomalies have been there, and they've been here. So Am I just all of a sudden going to have to trust the European model that it's got this right? No way. I don't trust it yet. It's going to have to prove itself right. And that's going to be critical. These high-pressure cells flanking North America are dominating the scene, and the models have not had a clue on where they're going to be. So I'm going to show you this, but I just want you to understand that I don't have a lot of trust in it. It's the 30-day precip outlook. Let's just go from mid-July to mid-August, right there. So what am I not trusting? Okay, it's wanted to make this area dry forever, right? It just has. And maybe in the next 7 to 10 days we could be drier here. But I'm telling you, if you have access to Gulf moisture, it will still storm in this area. It'll storm in this area. It'll storm here. And I just can't buy these models the way they look. Oh, and by the way, here's the 30-day outlook on temperatures. Now, where did I show you the heat coming in? It's coming in there in the near-term forecast and then expanding along with the influence of the high. This model would make you think that, oh, there's a southwest monsoon, there's a ridge here, and it's just going to start to expand from the west. And I don't buy it at all. I just don't. So I'm going to show you. This is what the newest update looks like from the CPC. They released this on Friday. This is their outlook for the last week of July, first week of August. And it makes more sense. They've got the heat kind of coming in from the southeast. I like that. That makes more sense to me. But I'm going to question this until I finally see it break over dry here. Because as I mentioned, we still have a lot of Gulf moisture coming into this area, and there will be storms inside of that, despite how we're seeing the dryness in the forecast. Now, what could make this very right, now listen carefully, what could make this very right is if, in fact, by the time we get into mid to late next week, an expansive ridge builds into this area. And if that happens, yes, you will go hotter and drier. There'll be an active southwest monsoon and a lot of severe weather rolling over the top of the edge of this. But, we got to get there first. We have to wait and see if that's going to occur. So that's my subseasonal outlook right now. As we look a bit farther, take a look at the current ocean temperatures as compared to the global average today. And what I'm telling you here is that we've seen so much warm water surge here. We've had the negative PMM. We've had the atmosphere still in this very interesting La Niña-like state. We've had strong winds that have curled around through the Arabian Sea and moved into India. We've had stronger trade winds here, stronger trade winds there, stronger trade winds here. And as we look out there longer term with this, we're going to skip that. We're just going to go here. My goodness, those trade winds across, the Equatorial Pacific remain very strong. That's a very La Niña-like signal. And if that is maintained, it's going to probably dictate this fall forecast. But this fall forecast is still a bit elusive because we need to know, are we really going to be surging in La Niña conditions? What is that going to do to the upper level jet stream pattern across North America, which should be kind of repositioning itself in fall? And what about this hurricane season? If I show you right now what the model suggests, this is the August, September, October forecast. It's trying to go a little drier here, a little drier there where we've had the bottom of that Bermuda high coming through. But there's not giving me much of a clue, I think, at this point as to when and where tropical systems are going to form. I will say this, though. When you go August, September, October, and just look at September, October, November, okay, if we do have La Niña conditions coming in, the model's responding by a very active end of the Indian monsoon, very wet throughout Indonesia, wet in Australia, and take a look at that. Possibly an early onset of moisture coming into South America as the Brazilian monsoon kicks off. So we're just maybe a couple of months away from having to talk a lot about Brazil in these forecast videos. All right, that was a lot today. You now know what I'm watching this week. Be prepared for the resurgence of heat late. Watch out for the open Gulf and the risk of a lot of instability building into the midsection of the country. We've got a tropical system we're keeping an eye on. And all the while, it's going to be a discussion on the background state of the atmosphere. What does it look like by the time we get into this hurricane season? So I'm going to stop it here, and we'll talk to you again real soon. Thanks.